Hi, my name is Nick Hernandez, and I just wanted to thank you for joining my TED Talk on prepping for the CS interview. Coming into college as an incoming computer science student, I was overwhelmed by the roadmap taking me from student to engineer. I had no clue what it would take to get me a job, which made me scared. I also constantly felt that I wasn't doing enough compared to those around me, which made me feel below average. Throughout my first and second year, I took my time to learn the steps that it would take to get me from where I was to where I wanted to be. In this TED Talk, I'll share my experiences and tips ranging from topics like networking and sending applications to the coding interview and how to absolutely nail it and land the job interview or land the job or internship that you've been wanting. I entered college, and the only relevant class that I had taken was AP Computer Science. Granted, I took a bunch of other AP classes, and AP Computer Science was the only class that I failed, but that's just the irony of the situation here. I spent the summer learning HTML and CSS basics, which are basics for web development. Turns out I didn't actually like web development in the slightest, and I never had to use these skills. However, it kept me fresh, and being able to pick up new languages and skills turned out to be quite a nifty skill on its own. School for me was quite a new environment, and I didn't really know what I should be doing to prepare for a job. Luckily, I did know somebody who had already been through that process. I knew an RA for my dorm, and he also happened to be a CS major, and he just accepted an internship with Amazon for this summer. He referred me to a Reddit page, CS Career Questions, as well as the book Cracking the Coding Interview. These two references turned out to be some of the most useful things that I could have used in preparation for my coding interview. Now let's start with networking. Networking turned out to be probably one of the biggest skills that I needed entering the computer science profession. Networking in itself isn't all that hard. However, it's really the courage to do so that is. I found my success within this field to be through networking, and my realization that recruiters are really just looking for somebody that they would want to work with. Having that realization that they are trying to hire someone that would be able to cooperate in team environments with them is really key, because if you think about it, they're not going to hire someone that they know that they can't work with. Knowing that, it's much easier to talk to these people and to be able to communicate with them at high pressure events like career fairs, because all you're doing is talking and trying to fit in, and being a match for company culture is probably one of the more important things with them. Thinking of these recruiters in this ways helped me shake the nerves that I was feeling, and that was great given how much networking you really are expected to do. Again, I went to career fairs, even as a freshman, but I also went to dinner events with sponsored companies and some other big conferences. These events were all extremely helpful in talking to companies and scouring potential opportunities. I found most success through people that I knew in the companies that I had met through these kind of events. But that's not to say that I hadn't found my own success through the general application pool either. I'd probably sent out a few hundred applications by this point, following the advice of the subreddit CS Career Questions. I found out that you'll be rejected by most. However, you will not know if some company would have hired you unless you've tried and at least shot your shot at that company. I firstly prioritized sending my applications to companies that I had networked with and knew people in. So I would first reach out to those companies and then reach out to all the other ones that you would like to work with as well. And second off, I would also reach out to recruiters in those companies that I don't know yet anyone from, and I would send them a message and see if there was any different pipeline that I could apply to as opposed to just a general application pool. And oftentimes that ended up working for me. Make sure that you stay organized in this process. You should be making an Excel spreadsheet, so that way you can stay on top of acceptances, rejections, which are inevitable, but then also dates and time frames that you should be expecting for each one. Once you really ace this step, you should have hopefully landed in some form of interview, and you'll be able to move on to the interview stage. There's usually a 2 to 5 part process for the CS interview. I won't go into too many details on all of the parts to the coding interview, but I really want to focus on the coding section, specifically the in-person coding section of the interview. The overall process in itself typically goes from coding challenge to phone call with a recruiter to a in-person technical interview to then an in-person behavioral interview. And again, that's just a broad overview. And there could be a few of each of these rounds, but that's just a very typical overview of what you should expect for a coding interview. Again, like I said, I wanted to focus primarily on the in-person coding interview. And I just want to hammer out some need to knows, as well as give you a general guideline as to what you should follow in order to really ace this coding interview. It's really from my own experience, but following these steps did help me land a job at one of the big 4 companies, Amazon. So you can take my advice with a grain of salt. This is the typical rigor that you should expect when applying to a bigger application like Amazon or Google. However, being able to perform at such a high level will really be able to extend to any other company that you really want to apply for. For the whiteboard portion, you really should be strict about how you want to code. First, you should stick with some easy language like Python with easy syntax, short lines, something that you won't fight with. If you pick Java, you might end up fighting the language, which is something you don't want to do in a high pressure situation. The interviewer mostly wants to see how you can problem solve and work in an environment that you're expected to ask questions in. So you might as well start with asking questions. You should ask 2 to 4 questions, just so that way you can show that you have a grasp of the problem and iron out any details that the interviewer could have potentially left out on purpose. Once you begin coding, you'll want to be making sure that you're vocal and explaining everything out loud. You'll first start with what's called a brute force solution, and it's one that's inefficient, but it works. But it's easy to grasp, and it's easy for your mind to wrap around. After you've got your brute force solution, you can start working towards a more efficient solution. If you have the time, you should be thinking of optimizations to this to make it a much simpler approach and a much faster problem solve. Typical optimizations can sometimes be found through the use of trees or map data structures, or even patterns like sliding window patterns. I don't have any time to go over any of these today, but make sure you get familiar with these because they definitely help, and you will see these on many different types of questions. The goal is really to familiarize yourself with many different types of coding questions. You really want to be able to get exposed to different types and to see as many as you can before your interview. You should be started with this whole process about 6 to 8 months in advance prior to that interview, and maybe do 1 or 2 questions a week. But once you get to 2 months out, that's crunch time. You should really be doing 3 questions a day, I recommend, so that way you can really be prepared for that interview. The goal, again, is to see as many problems as you can and to be able to know all the different types of tricks that you can do to solve these kinds of problems, and at least have some kind of thought process going before you attempt the problem. So by this point, I've gone over the basics to networking and how these relationships can be crucial to your application experience. I've also mentioned how the personal connection between you and the industry professional is really key to your success in this. I've gone over how you should take advantage of sending hundreds of applications regardless of rejection or fear of rejection, because you really should be dipping your toes into the application pool like that. You should be ready to click the autofill button because, if you've sent out that many, they'll already be populated like that. But most importantly, I've given you the structure to acing your coding interview. This is often the hardest part of the interview, but if you can see many different problem types and have logged many different or many hours of experience over the course of months, you'll be able to find the success that you want in your job or internship hunting process. Again, my name is Nick Hernandez, and I want to thank you for tuning in and listening to my talk.